right? Once we start looking at a variety of texts, then we have an understanding of the difference in style, writing, and get a feel for one playwright versus another, yes? So visual elements are an important part of theater. Yes, oftentimes we're very drawn to those elements when we see a show, right? So what is presented to us, right? Through costumes, yes? Through lighting design. I actually love lighting design, and I'm not a lighting designer, but I'm very drawn to watching lights and getting a sense of how and why a designer utilized something. And I think it'll be cool for you guys to notice that when you go to see shows. Things to look out for are color, right? Like, why is a certain color used within lighting? And you can see some of them even in here. There's different instruments which create a different effect, right? Like a large wash on the stage versus something that's a spot and very focused. And how do you feel when like all the lights are up and everything's really bright versus, you know, there's like a very dim stage? Scenery is obviously an important part, right? The set, and is it representative? Is it very literal? Is it kind of figurative, right? How is it being used? In our theater here, right, it's very shallow. It's not incredibly wide. So we tend to build up a bit to create levels and variety to make things interesting for the audience. And then sound. I think sound is probably one of the elements of theater that most people who don't study it don't know as much about or don't think as much about. But obviously sound comes in with microphones, having to amplify the actors. In some theaters they use hanging mics to pick up like general sound.
There's one right back there too. There's one right back there too.
Yeah. Right there. Not on. And also the use of like sound design, meaning motivated sounds, right? If we're in a park, am I gonna utilize like birds chirping, right? Like what am I gonna do to create a certain ambiance so that you feel a sense of realism, right? The director is a super important element of theater, so what do they do exactly, right? So I would say in its broadest explanation, right, the director is responsible for unifying elements, meaning if I'm a director, I need to talk to my creative team. I need to bring them together so that we create something cohesive, right? If I want something very realistic, I need to convey that to my designers, right? Meaning I want the set to look like right out of a living room. Yes, I want the lights to be naturalistic. I don't want the sounds to be too harsh. And those are ways of telling the story in a cohesive manner. And I will say, it can be challenging, right? You're working with different people and you're trying to appease everyone, and designers have a certain idea of how they want their work to be kind of produced. And so the director essentially is in charge and really is like the final say, but you want to create like a positive working environment with people, of course. And depending on the personalities, that's easier. So actors, I think you're obviously most familiar, right? Our job is to create the role physically and vocally, and we interpret. Yes. And then the audience. The audience is everything in the theater. You don't really have theater without an audience. They're the final collaborator. Today we're going to look at stage spaces, meaning different designs of theaters and how that impacts your experience as an actor and an audience member. And I really appreciate this quote. In other arts, the audience sees the result of a creative process. In theater, the audience is present during that process. So for those of you who have been in shows, every night is different. Different people sit there, different people react to different things. Sometimes you're almost like taken out of the world of the play because nobody laughs when they usually laugh, and you just have to recognize that like you can't be performing the play for the audience's reaction. You have to just tell the story, but sometimes it's just hard to not get taken out when you have a certain expectation. All right, so we're going to talk about 4 different spatial arrangements in the theater. So these are 4 different names, right? A proscenium style theater, arena, a thrust theater, and a black box. Okay, so sorry, some of this was, I didn't adjust adjust it for Grossmont, but I will make sure to make the correct correlations. So a proscenium style stage, most of you have been to if you've ever been to a movie theater, right? It is a space bordered by an arc or a frame creating a box or a picture frame effect. Yes? We don't really have that space here yet, like a very formal and large space, but if you've ever been to a show downtown at the Civic or the Balboa Theater, those are all like very formal setups, right? So here are the important kind of affects of seeing or participating in a show like that. So it has a distancing effect. That is because usually there's a large space between the stage and the beginning of the audience, right? So it's a literal distance, right? It's very removed, which creates that sense of formality. And fourth wall, we've kind of mentioned that, but I want to kind of clarify that term, right? So if I'm setting this up like a proscenium, which I am now because you, the audience, are all oriented in facing one direction, here's a wall, right? There's a wall, there's a wall, and then this, right? This picture view of you into my action and story is my fourth wall. So I, as the actor, have to treat it like it is realistic, it makes sense, but I have to also be aware that this is your only view into my story. So you probably don't want to go see a show where like everyone's, you know, talking to each other like this, right? Because then you're not really able to participate. And it has a very strong focus because, again, all of the seats in a proscenium style theater are set up like this where everyone is facing one direction. So I, as a director, have an easier time getting you all to pay attention to certain areas, which are enhanced by the use of lighting or the set or things like that. Yeah. So just ignore the Shining Theater example. Okay, the next is an arena stage, which is sometimes called theater in the round. Yes, because the space is circular. So it is entirely surrounded by the audience, right? So we went from just one section, essentially like a fourth of the space, to everything. And all the action takes place in the middle, right? So what did I write out here? It has an informal feel. Yeah, well, if I'm the actor, that's very informal because I have nowhere to kind of escape, right? Everywhere I go, the audience is there, which is also why I wrote primitive, right? Because this is kind of indicative of Roman Colosseum, and that there's kind of a great vulnerability for the actors. Intimate. Yes, most theaters of this orientation are small in stature, but it's also intimate because you as the audience can see the action on stage, and then you can see the other audience members, which I love doing, by the way, because I'm always like, oh, how are they enjoying the show? Yes.
If you notice at rock concerts or even like shows at the Viejas Arena, you can, it's all that's how it is. It's, you can see the audience members from like the back, the sides, and you can see how they're interacting with the actual center.
Really.
Yeah,
totally. So this orientation space demands a realistic style of acting. I don't have the ability as a director to surprise you as much in this space as I do in a formal proscenium, right? Because usually in a proscenium style stage, I can bring something on that you don't see coming or drop it in. With this space, like, how am I going to do that, right? Some theaters with this arrangement have traps, meaning somebody comes from underneath, so like that could be an element of surprise, but beyond that, you don't have a lot of ability, right? So arena stage, yes. Proscenium, we've covered those two. Thrust. Sometimes this is referred to as like a 3/4 space as well, right? Because the stage thrusts into the audience surrounded by three sides. And I would say our theater here at Grossmont is the best example of that, right? We have very clear delineation of three audience kind of sections, right? And then I also put a picture of a runway because I felt like that was a non-theater kind of common use of this space. So it's an interesting space to produce in because it has the intimacy of an arena, right? Again, usually the spaces are smaller, but it has the focus of a proscenium because, again, I have back wall in which I can pull the actors back, I can add height with the set, and force you as an audience to really have to focally like navigate to one area. Yeah. Have any of you not been in this theater here? You haven't seen anything in that space? I say here because it's like on the other side of the wall. You haven't been in the space yet. You have not. Yeah, it's such a cool, intimate theater, and the first row
It's where I
is
sit.
like on the stage level.
Yeah.
So you're like really in it.
Yeah.
You know, if you happen to like sit that close. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been in Grossmont's theater either, but my old church had this kind of stage
Oh, interesting.
in their what would we call that?
Sanctuary?
No,
No sanctuary.
we had a theater ministry, so,
Okay.
And yeah,
so we had
our stage was a thrust stage.
Oh, cool. I think it's really flexible, you know, and again, in spaces like that or in schools to be able to do shows in a very intimate setting, I think is nice because people feel like more connected in their experience of seeing the show. And then the last space is the Black Box Theater, which is where we are right now. Literally, this is considered the Black Box like theater here at Grossmont, right? It's funny because I also teach like in the box at USD. But this is a flexible, adaptable space, right? So in this room, we utilize it as a classroom, right? It has a tremendous amount of economy. But you notice that there are light hangs so that we can turn this room, right? And in fact, actually today when this is done, I'll turn on those stage lights and you'll see how different the room feels with a very different lighting effect. But I could set this room up any way I wanted. I could, right, put the chairs in a circle or whatever. So honestly, every college campus that I've been to has this type of space just because it's so economical and flexible and you can produce a lot of things. And we used to like produce more shows in here, especially the shows we do that are for young audiences. So I think it's just a great space, and also we have like a divide here so we can like create a backstage area if need be. Yeah. Okay, so those were the spaces, yes? Now we're gonna move on to talking a little bit about some terminology. So, in your study guide, there are terms, a few more actually even in here, and the definitions. On the quiz, I will give you the definition, and you will just write in the term. So we'll go over a few, right? So what is a callback, right? Callback's a really good thing. It means you went to an audition and they liked you, and they want to see you again, so they literally call you back, right? So it's usually the second round, and sometimes there are a series of callbacks, like you'll go to 2 or 3, but it's always a good thing because it means like they're observing more of you. A chorus, I think you're probably most familiar with that term, another word for ensemble, right? Like a large group that really embodies kind of one perspective of what's happening. Obviously we get that from Greek theater and how they use the chorus to inform the audience of how you're supposed to feel, right? That was their role, right? Which is to clue you in on like, that's the bad guy, we don't like him. And so you kind of look to them for your response. Cold reading. So sometimes at auditions, they like to hand you a piece of paper that you've never seen before and say, here, read this. So you have no time to prepare, right? And it can be anxiety provoking.
I love the most.
You love it?
I freaking love it.
Good for you. I think that's so great because
I wouldn't mind doing it.
honestly,
I mean, it sounds
what
like
I tell
musical.
students is like, they don't expect you to be comfortable with it. They're just looking for you to take a stab at it and like have fun. Yeah.
It reminds me of how music where you just, they plop a piece of music in front of you and just say, sight read. Okay,
That is
cool.
so much harder, actually.
Let's do that.
In my opinion.
Let's do this.
A cue. Okay, so when you guys get into your scenes, right, you may be looking for a cue, right? Let's say in our scene, I get angry with you, and at a certain point I leave. So my cue is most likely going to be something Aubrey says. Yes, it may be written in the stage directions. It may say, like, at this point, so-and-so character leaves, right? However, sometimes it's not there, or sometimes the director decides to change that, and so then you have to establish what is the cue for this, right? On what line are you going to leave and why? Yeah? Improvisation. right?
Ad lib.
Yes, you know that. Blocking. So blocking is the direction of the actor's movement on stage given by a director. Yes? Very similar to choreography. So I'm going to create a pattern for you. I'm going to tell you when to move and how to move. Right? So it's the actor's sense of movement and direction. Cheating out. Right? So if I'm in a scene and I'm not, this is my scene partner, right? I'm not talking to them like I would in real life, but I am squaring off my shoulders to the audience so you feel included. And even with like my advanced acting class, I'm still like, you guys, I just want to like grab their shoulders, like pull yourself out, because it's just so hard. We're so, it's so ingrained in us in real life to look at people and be polite and like engage with one another that when we're on stage, we want to mimic that behavior. But then an audience doesn't get included, so we really have to open up. And then the word cross is in relation to blocking, right? So again, it's just a sense of direction, right? If I ask you to cross the stage, you know, you're gonna move in a specific direction. So usually it's like a cross down, a cross up, a cross left, so that you have a sense of where you're going. Yes? Okay. All right, now we're gonna move on to talking about two very influential teachers of acting. So the first is Konstantin Stanislovsky. His name is either spelled when like translated into English with a C or a K, because we all know that English is not a perfect language. And we have so many letters. We have too many letters. There's so many that make the same sound. So if you see it with a K, it's not like that was wrong. It's just when you're translating Russian. Anyway, who is he? Why is he important? He was a Russian actor, director, and teacher. He's considered the father of contemporary realistic acting techniques, right? Why? What does that mean exactly? So a big part of his method was about psychologically motivated physical action, right? So if I'm angry, what is something I may do to express my anger? What is something, yeah.
Shake your fist, perhaps.
Yeah, sure, go like this.
Yeah.
What might I do to someone?
Yeah.
Punch them.
Yes. Right? So that physical action is a result of like this connection, how I'm feeling, and all of a sudden I have a need to react towards someone to get that out, and so I physically do something, right? Very rarely do you go up to people and like touch them or make physical contact with like out of sense of motivation, right? Or even get out of your own bed, right? Or sit down in a chair. Like all of those things, all of those movements are because you need something, you want something, and you're feeling a certain way, right? He was incredibly influential because he started to recognize that there was a way to train actors for careers in the theater. And that in doing that, you really had to take an investigation into his method, which we'll talk a bit more about in the next slide too, that created a sense of realism on stage, right? Which in itself is like an interesting theory because you're creating a version of reality, right? He also did subscribe that you should try and do as much as possible to emulate the character to become them, right? As much as you can. I'm busy, I can watch with you. And so that gets a little dicey at some places, and then other teachers are like, maybe you don't need to do all of that to understand what it means to like become that character, right? So his system determines how somebody can control in performance the most intangible and uncontrollable aspects of human behavior, such as emotions, right? And what that quote means is, how can you replicate crying and feeling hurt and anger on stage in a way that you don't lose control as the actor and you're able to continue on with your story, right? Because if something triggers us in real life and we cry, we don't think, I'm gonna cry for 2 minutes, right? You actually have like no sense of time in that moment because you're just so connected to how you're feeling. But in the theater, you have to understand like, well, I'm gonna cry, this is part of the scene, but then at a certain point, like, we move on, right? So I have to be able to control like the flow and flood of emotion. So more of his technique. Some of this, y'all, we've already done.
Hey!
Right? Physical and vocal relaxation. We did our guided meditation, right? So a big principle of his acting was the ability to like fully relax physically and meditate your body, right? He also believed in a great deal of technique and work towards vocal relaxation, which we did a little bit about, like with our breath work and understanding releasing tension and all of that to free the sound. The word I use all the time, right? Observation or assessment. He really wanted to create a space where we could analyze and kind of laboratory what was happening. So other things that he contributed, specificity, okay? A term in which we create a great deal of detail called given circumstances, right? Which help us to create realistic, believable characters, yes? So today in an activity, you're gonna create a scenario and a relationship, and it's on you to come up with given circumstances. Who are you? Who are the characters? Where are you? What are you doing? And why are you doing it? Without all those who, what, when, why, it's vague, and it doesn't translate to being very dynamic on stage, right? And it's amazing the amount of questions we as actors ask ourselves to create a believable, like, fake person, right? So another term of his was inner truth, and what he meant by that is your subtext. So I think I mentioned like how fascinated I am with passive aggressive people, right? Because you ask them something, right? Like, how are you today? And a passive aggressive person's like, well, I'm fine.
You should meet my science teachers.
What?
I said you should meet my science teachers.
Oh my god, are they passive aggressive?
Extremely.
Wow, why?
I don't know.
See, that's my
I
struggle.
don't know.
I just want to be like, why are you being passive aggressive? What's happening? How are you feeling?
Sometimes they don't even know.
Yeah. Right, because like we're not all hyper aware of like how and what we're saying to people, because we're trying to maybe conceal something and we don't realize that we're kind of promoting that. But my favorite is really the people that just won't tell you. They want you to like work for it, and you're like, are you really okay? Because you seem like a little.
Me and all.
You seem like you're like, yeah, I'm fine. Why do you ask?
Aggressive is much better.
Like,
Yeah, it's the tone of voice they use too, like, I'm fine, get it, you know?
Or their physical communication
Yeah.
and mannerisms. You're like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All
Like,
right.
okay, didn't mean to step
And
on
then,
your
like, You
toes.
can't really go anywhere from there because it's so awkward.
Yeah.
And you know that there's, I hate it, yeah. Anyway, subtext, right? I love conveying subtext on stage because to me that's far more interesting than just what the character's like naturally sharing, yeah? So imagination. We have engaged our imagination in this class when we did the chair exercise, right? And when we've done a variety
Oh, I
of
love that
different-
one.
Yeah, you need to be able to be open to believing that you can convey these things, or you can be these things, or see these things, yes? My little kid class that I teach once a week, like, they are so easy to engage with their imagination, right? Because they're like, I'm a fire truck. I'm like, okay, great. And they are, right? Because they believe it. It's very cool. Psychophysical action, I just mentioned that, right? So purposeful action, movement, or what we're doing to fulfill a character's goal. And then what is motivating you in the scene, right? Like, you're hurt because why? What do you want from the character? What is your hope for a resolution? So this terminology is really important. It will come up in an activity today, monologues, like all of that stuff, yes? Some of y'all are looking a little sleepy, by the way, and I know I'm not that boring, so I need you to like pep up and like put the phones away, just letting you know. Okay, these are probably the most important words that Stanislavsky gave us in the theater. Obstacle, right? And objective. So objective is the goal that propels a character into action, or what you as a character want. And I ask that all the time, what do you want? What's your objective? And the answer, you guys, is a very short, simple sentence. It's not a summary of your monologue. It's what do you want, right? So in the scene where I get angry with Aubrey, maybe I want her to admit that she stole my car. So it's that short and simple. Yes? What's my obstacle? Well, she's not being forthcoming. She's not being honest. She's not telling me, right? I have this inherent obstacle of like trying to get the truth out of somebody who won't give it to me, and that relationship creates conflict, and that's why we go to the theater. You don't want to pay to watch happy, pretty people become happier. That's not interesting.
So obstacles can be anything person to like an actual object?
We, all of us, as just us people, have many obstacles every day, right? Guess what? I'm running late. That's an obstacle. I really can't be late, but there's traffic. And what the fuck can I do about it? Right? That's my obstacle. My objective is I gotta get to the class on time. Right? And then that conflict of like me and my road rage is what's like interesting. Yeah. But I think we just don't even realize how often throughout the day we have many objectives and many obstacles. Yeah. And yes, sometimes an obstacle is another person in our way or what challenge they're presenting to us.
Tell me about it.
And the structure, so to speak, of how this comes out in the show is usually at the end of Act 1. You get like the kind of dun dun dun, the big
Cliffhanger.
yeah. And so you have a little break, and then in Act 2 we see everything resolve, right? Which we want to have happen, right? And we know sometimes in stories and such, things don't resolve, or they resolve in a way that we weren't anticipating, right?
Or expecting.
What?
Love's Later's lost.
Right. And again, like, why, right? Because we're supposed to leave understanding that like resolution doesn't always happen, or it doesn't, happen in the way in which we think it should. Yeah. You will always have an objective in any scene, any monologue you do. Always, always, always. Yes. Oh, look at this handsome devil, Sanford Meisner.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So Sanford Meisner studied with Stanislavsky. Yes.
Oh, my friends.
Love him. Okay, don't write down everything on here. I just want to point out about the repetition exercise that we'll have an opportunity to do on Thursday. So Meisner took what he learned from Stanislavsky, but then obviously incorporated his own beliefs. Yes? So big picture, Meisner wants you to focus on your partner. He wants you to get out of here and your self-assessment of how I'm doing and just listen to somebody else. Look at somebody else. Observe somebody else. Concentrate on somebody else. And in doing that, you hopefully react in a way that seems natural. Right? But if you're just like, oh, this is what I want, this is what I need, then you're not like listening to your partner, right? So he came up with this repetition exercise. Yes? So the repetition exercise is a series where you and a partner go back and forth, repeating the same small text and dialogue until something changes. And what do I mean by that, right? So an example of the repetition exercise is I could say to Aubrey, you're wearing a black hoodie, right? I'm making an observation. She responds, I am wearing a black hoodie. And we just continue with that text until there's something else that takes over, and maybe Aubrey's like, well, you're wearing a black jacket. I am wearing a black jacket, right? And then we start to have this improvised dialogue where we're noticing things and we're concentrating, but the goal is to try and stay with the same text as long as you can until you no longer can communicate with that, and then you have to focus on something else.
So is it like a respond and react?
Yes. Absolutely, right? Because in saying that many, many, many times back and forth, you're wearing a black hoodie, I am wearing a black hoodie, we start to convey subtext. The words start to sound really weird if you ever like repeat one sentence over and over again, right? And so, yeah, we're communicating something else without changing the dialogue. And the spontaneity of the moment of saying something else happened because we are connected and focusing on just one another. Yeah, it can seem a little like mundane, but it's very interesting, So yeah, repetition exercise. Meisner. Yes.
Yes.
Psychophysical action. Stanislavsky. Also important is Meisner's definition of acting, which is to live truthfully under imaginary circumstances. So unlike Stanislavsky, he wants you as the actor to acknowledge that, like, no, your name is not Jane, and you don't live in this world. That's imaginary. But what can you do to live as realistic and natural on stage as Jane, right? And one thing that I really take from Meisner, because he was very musical, is a lot of times when I'm like working with actors, I just listen and I stop taking in what you're doing visually, so I can get a stronger sense orally of like how are you communicating, which is why I liked to do a lot of the vocal work that we did. And his question, and we'll see a little video of him, is why? Why are you doing that, right? So when a director or an acting teacher is engaging you, they want you to just have answers for that, because in real life you do. Why are you coming to Grossmont? Why are you taking an acting 1 class? Why were you on time today, right? Like, you have answers for all those things, even though you don't think you do. So your character should be able to as well, right? Oh, maybe I should turn on. Maybe we should turn on the sound.
Yeah.
Sorry, give me 1 second. We need to get to this little knob door.
That's right behind me.
All right, so this is a video of the Sanford Meisner.
He said, acting is the ability to live truthfully under the given imaginary circumstances. Now, he had worked on that sentence for 71 years. Funny, he didn't use the word talent. He said it's an ability, and an ability is a skill. And the cool thing about a skill is it's learnable.
Acting is an emotional profession.
Don't tell me not to slam the door in your face, you...
Mandy,
Jack.
Well, that's like two people who don't believe in sex.
I always said Sandy's work is nuts and bolts.
Picture.
Oh.
That's right. Don't wait for God to make you hysterical. Not that you're pregnant. Who are his friends to you?
They're my enemies.
They're bums. But a hell of a situation. You have been reduced to nothing.
And I want to be alive too!
The only thing that's real is what's going on between you and me right now, right here, in this moment.
You do that. Play. Play. It's a play. You know what the most important word is in this acting thing. Why? And the answer is emotional.
This technique is not only a technique in learning how to act, but it's a technique in learning how to live life, and it changes people's lives.
So he sounds interesting, right? He had a laryngectomy. So his larynx was removed, which is why how he phonates is adjusted and affected, and he has kind of that almost computerized sound to him. So my favorite Meisner quote: to be an interesting actor, hell, to be an interesting human being, you must be authentic. And for you to be authentic, you must embrace who you really are, warts and all. Do you have any idea how liberating it is to not care what people think about you? Well, that's what we're here to do, right? And I would say that this quote inspires me every semester that I teach any level of acting. I don't think it's possible to really apply yourself in the theater and learn about acting without learning about yourself, without getting a sense of why I, communicate a certain way, or why I don't want to yell, or, right? Like, alongside understanding and inhabiting characters, we get an insight into what makes us us. And I think that's probably the most interesting thing for me every semester when I continue this work. I certainly find it gratifying as an actor too. It can be very therapeutic. It can be a little scary. It can be very liberating, right? But I think we've already seen like our own growth and development in this class and our ability to kind of connect with one another when we feel safe and supported. Yeah. Okay, so the last thing, this entire document is in your Canvas. Okay, so first I want to talk about stage directions, okay? Here's the audience. Yes, if I am very close to you, the audience, I am downstage. If I'm far away, I'm upstage. Why is that? So in the Shakespearean era of theatrical design, the stage was raked, which means it was elevated in the back, up, right? Like I walk up a hill, because if the stage is flat and the audience is flat, you can't see anything, right? Which is why in this theater, right, the stage, the audience goes up very sharply so that you can see what's happening, right? So downstage is literally down, yes? Okay, so left and right, from my point of view, mine being the actor, always the actor, right? So if Reese is my director and he's engaging with me and he's like, hey, I want you to go down right, I'm going to my right. Yes, and everything is going to be blocked with that sense of direction, right? Hey, Mitzi, I want you to go up. Okay, right? I remove myself from the audience. So that's just sense of direction. Yes, always important where the relation to the audience is. Now, this theory came much later than like the direction about how different areas of the stage evoke different moods for the audience, right? And so again, this isn't exhaustive, like this is a theory of practice of how to use a Persinian style fear that I want you to become familiar with. So on the quiz, you will map. You will identify what is downstage, what is upstage, what is stage right, what is center, yes? And in addition to that, I want you to notice some of the moods. So we'll talk about downstage right, because I'm already here, right? So the theory about this mood factor is that you as an audience get a sense from me that I am warm, informal, and tender, right? So part of the theory behind this is based on how we read English, yes? From left to right.
Okay.
So this essentially is like the beginning of the sentence. And you're very open and receptive at this point to getting information. Right, then you read, and this is like the end of the sentence. Suddenly there's like a kind of an element of what's coming next for you, right, until your eye wraps back around, which is why this area of the stage tends to feel scary or unknown. Something interesting to look at when you see shows, and maybe in Spring Awakening, I don't know, I haven't seen a preview, but where do strangers come in from? Where do strangers enter the stage, and where do people who live in the house or from that come in from? And a very important directorial distinction is to create a difference in that, right? So that you establish kind of purpose and recognition, yeah? So another one I'll talk about is up center, right? So where does that come from, right? Because the moods there are regal, aloof, noble, and superior. So think about the design of a classic courtroom. Yes, the judge sits where?
In the middle, back.
Right, all the way in the back. And they're elevated,
yeah.
right? Which gives them a very strong posturing of power, right? And again, like they have a sense of nobility because they make the rules. So for an actor on stage to be up center means there's